Hey, South Valley Angels is a early stage or seed stage investment company. We provide a community for environment for investors to be able to come and comfortably assess and look at new early startup companies and determine whether those companies are worthy of an investment, and whether or not the return is there, and whether the company brings something new, innovative, and brings value, to society. Well, that's kind of interesting. As you know, in the Silicon Valley, the majority of companies are located in the Palo Alto, San Mateo, San Francisco arena. And we wanted to get outside of that because I had to focus in a little bit different area. So we set up in Morgan Hill primarily for two reasons. One, because I live in Morgan Hill and I was getting tired of going up to Palo Alto all the time. And two, one of the areas that's that does not get very much attention here in the Valley is manufactured products. And Morgan Hill has a very strong manufacturing infrastructure here. So I came down here with the intent of focusing more on manufactured products. As it turns out, in our 3 years, virtually all the companies we've invested in have in fact been tangible items or manufactured items. So one of the early companies was an electric bicycle. We've invested in a medical device, which was in fact our first investment as a group, and that medical device is for asthma patients. What it allows you to do is you just blow into it like a whistle and it tells you when your next asthma attack's coming. And so what they did was take what's currently kind of in the hospitals, which you have to go for and so forth, and they sort of Silicon Valleyized it and made it very small, sits in your pocket, and costs $400 instead of $5,000. And it's an amazing device for patients. In fact, they just received a second round of funding of $7 million last week. So the investors are they're happy this week. We've also invested locally. We did an outside of the box investment in the fact that it wasn't really a startup in the sense of where you're looking for the 10-time return on investment, but we had a small cookie company that was trying to get started and they wanted to put their bakery here in Morgan Hill. So we funded them to do that, which was a really good community project, because what happened was when he tried to set up, we discovered that Morgan Hill had no ordinance to allow a bakery in town. So he found a place that he wanted to put his bakery. At that time I was the chair for the Economic Development Committee. So we brought that into the Economic Development Committee, took that to the city, and within 30 days they passed and changed the ordinance and allowed him to put his bakery here in town. Let's see, we've also invested in a very novel hydroponics greenhouse, which uses 2% of the water of a field crop, produces a head of lettuce in 25 days versus 120 days in Salinas, and that we funded in January. It was a startup company with basically nothing on the books. By May they had $2 million on the books, had built two projects in Botswana, Africa, and are now on a 7-country rollout in Africa, and they're a rock star in Africa right now. She attended the Obama summit on African business and got to actually sit down and meet with the president. Let's see, what else do we have in there? We had an LED light, which is a consumer product, which is a pretty amazing light. It will light up an entire neighborhood just about, and it's about 10 cents on the dollar for the competing lights, and virtually all the desert racers right now are using his lights on their motorcycles and cars. Well, there's a couple things. One, we stand out amongst the crowd. We're not on Sand Hill Road or Page Mill Road where everybody else is located, and being new, it allows us to really differentiate ourselves from what's going on up there and not get lost in the crowd. As you know, the Silicon Valley, for us, this startup and private investment is standard business here in the Valley. We've been doing it for several decades. The reality is, in the rest of the world, it's brand new. This is really new for the rest of the world. Virtually every country has an office in the Silicon Valley which does back and forth cross-border work with the different folks here in the Valley. And so we wanted to separate ourselves, and with our focus on manufacturing, that allows us to really stand out amongst the crowd. So when I go to a meeting full of investors, and I say I'm in Morgan Hill, that resonates across the group because I'm the only one in the room that is located down here. Well, I find the business environment in Morgan Hill interesting. It's expanding. I believe that it's an interesting community in the fact that if you take a look at our average income in Morgan Hill, it's about $120,000 a year. However, that $120,000 a year businessman or woman goes to San Jose, Sunnyvale, Cupertino to work. Most of those don't work here in the valley. So we are somewhat of a business community. The city understands that, and they kind of tend to focus on the retail side of things. So that was another reason that I came down here, was to try to build up the manufacturing, the business side of what's going down here. I think it's an exciting place down here. A lot of people are looking for change and seeing opportunities. So I think if we can help do that here in the valley, or down here in Morgan Hill, and help get these folks coming right out of high school, let's say, for example, and create new and exciting businesses here in town, I think we have a real opportunity for Morgan Hill to kind of step into what the rest of the valley is already doing. South Valley Angels, we work a lot with the communities. Like I said, we reached out and got a company started here, which is really outside of what private investment. I can guarantee that nobody in the Silicon Valley would have ever invested in that endeavor. But most of our investors are very, very involved in the community. So, for example, I was the chair for the Economic Development Committee for several years. John Varela, who was prior to and is now again the chair of that, he's one of our investors. One of our big investors is Rob Christopher, whose father is Don Christopher, owns Christopher Ranch. So we've got a lot of fingers throughout the community here, and we're pretty involved on a regular basis. Sure, we have a pretty straightforward process. They just send us their executive summary. And so in this industry, your executive summary is your business resume. It's a one-pager that covers all the details. So they'll send us their resume. We'll take a look at that and review it. If we find it interesting, I'll get back in touch with you. We'll have you come in. We meet once a month, every third Wednesday. And we'll have you come in and give a pitch. The pitch is about 10 or 15 minutes. Then there's about 15 minutes of question and answer. So it's about 30 minutes of which we allot for you to run through everything. And then after that, if we go and we sort of do a powwow on the companies that pitched after that. If there's any particular that we have a real interest in, then we'll do what's referred to commonly as a deep dive. What we'll do then is have them bring their entire team in, their business plan, all their financials, and we'll identify a project manager, so to speak, who is generally the most interested of the investors, who's looking to probably put in the most amount of money. The way our investors work is they're all independent. So if a guy says, hey, I like your company, he writes a check directly to the company. We don't pool money, we don't put it into funds. And we did that to make it simpler. We don't want the SEC requirements and so forth. So it's the investor works directly with the company. After that, then if everybody says, hey, I like this company, then you go into the due diligence. And the due diligence isn't really a due diligence. That really happens in the deep dive. At the end of the deep dive, you know whether or not we know if we're going to invest in you or not. All what they refers to as due diligence is really when we hammer out the negotiations of the term sheet. And that's when the lawyers come on board, and that's when we as investors start spending our money. And then at the end of the term sheet, if everything works out and everybody can arrive at everything, you get your check.